And we are live. Welcome everyone to ACDE 179. We have a lot of stuff today. Hopefully we can get through it. But first, we'll talk about Dan Kuhn. Obviously, go back on how Gordy went. And then there's a couple small changes. So, or at least items to discuss. So some things around JSON RPC, some things around 4788. Xiaowei linked a new CL release PR, and then making sure we're still on the same page about timing for next testnets. Once we have that done, then there's a bunch of discussion around the next fork, Prague/Electra. There were a couple specific EIPs that people wanted to discuss, so we can cover those. And then I think it makes sense to hear from all the different teams what they think about the upgrade as a whole and what people's priorities are. And then lastly, on the next upgrade, the Verkle folks want to do kind of a deep dive on the next ACDE. And one thing that would be helpful is collecting feedback today on what people want to see and discuss so that they can best prepare for it. And then at the end, hopefully we have time for this, but there was a Besu mainnet incident that we'd like to discuss briefly. So I guess to get us started, I don't know, Perry or Barnabas, do either of you want to start with a high-level Gordy recap, and then if any client teams want to chime in, we can do that as well?
Yeah, I can go. So we had the Gurley fork yesterday around 6:30 UTC, and immediately after the fork, we saw that there was a drop in participation. I think we went down all the way to about 40%. And on triaging, we narrowed it down to one client being offline due to a failed upgrade and one client issue itself. The client issue was hotfixed soon, and I think someone from the Prism team can talk more about that. And once the hotfix was applied, the network did exceed 70-ish% participation rates, and then we were seeing finality. During the non-finalizing period, we did submit some blobs. They made it through perfectly fine. And post-finality, we started blob spamming as well. That went on for about 7-ish hours. And based on that, we've written an initial analysis that should showcase how the blobs fared in terms of propagation time and what effect they had on blocks themselves. Besides that, overnight, we didn't run any other blob tests, but we started the spammer again today morning.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, is anyone from Prism on?
Yeah, hello.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, I can give a brief update on what went wrong.
Yeah.
So what happened was that when Prism upgrade from Capella to DNet state, we kept the historical root empty instead of carrying it over. So this issue was fairly easy to find. We basically patched it the first few hours, and then we released the high image. And then I believe the Capella state, I believe the DNet was finalized about 2 a.m. Pacific time, so about 4 hours after. So just give a little background, right? So historical root is this legacy field. It's essentially frozen at Capella. It was used before Capella, so it was the old field. And then why it didn't get surfaced before the previous DevNet or shadow port was that we need to run enough we essentially need to run enough at the previous port to essentially have it as non-zero. And then this is only updated for every 24 hours. So say today, if you start from Bellatrix and then you hard forward to Capella, less than 24 hours, if the time is less than 24 hours, this is going to be zero. So that's essentially what happened before. That's why we didn't catch it. And then SPAT test also didn't catch it. So we immediately surfaced that to Xiaowei, and thanks for Xiaowei, there's a PR on that. So essentially SPAT test will cover that. So this is just one of those very rare edge cases. Thankful for Gordy. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have caught it until later.
Got it, thanks. And Yeah, I guess this is also something we can not only catch in the spec test, but when we run DevNets, we could explicitly have like a fork happen, once the sort of far enough from the previous one to allow.
Yeah, or the Genesis state can just have a value in that field because
Oh,
mainnet
right.
always will have values in that field, and so Genesis states on our dev nets just might as well. But yeah, it was a failure. This should be caught way upstream, and just kind of the weirdness of the deprecation of that, and not thinking through the fork boundary test all the way. We didn't have one in the consensus spec test, so um, that is there as of the release that'll go live right after this call, and we can spend some time making sure there's nothing else funky on fork boundary tests, although Gorley probably would have caught anything else like that.
Got it. And I think this was the only sort of major client issue that we saw on Gordy, but do any other client team want to share anything notable or interesting that they saw during the fork?
I had one issue that I surfaced. It's
Yep.
also minor that like Prism are seeing client team. So this is consensus. So like kind of apologize bringing it here. So like Prism are seeing client team requesting blocks for every index no matter what. So say today if you have a block that doesn't have any KZG commitment, we're getting requests for the block, and it's slightly wasteful, I would say. So yeah, I've serviced. I think it was I don't want to point name, but I think it was like Teku or something like that was doing that. So yeah, so I think Teku team is aware of that.
Yeah, it is. So we do in some cases request blobs, but it should not happen in that case specifically. So I'm just double checking later today. But I think in the case that the block has zero commitment, we should not do that. So I suspect there should be something, some other peer or something running all over the network that does that. But I'll double check in any case because we do something similar.
Awesome, thanks. And I suspect this would be an easy fix once you identify it to discriminate based on the commitment. Yeah. Any other comments, thoughts by client teams?
One thing I did want to ask was right now we're artificially spamming Gully with blobs, and everything's kind of being submitted to the same set of nodes. So the propagation statistics will also look as if they've been submitted to the same set of nodes. We tried stopping for a bit. There's just not much native blob traffic on Gurley. It would be really nice to know when L2s start to plan using it and when we should stop spamming it.
Do we expect L2s to use the Gorley blobs given the deprecation, or are they going to focus on another testnet?
I don't want to speak for Arbitrum, but I work fairly close to them. I don't think they will use Gordy. So the likely testnet, the most likely one, will be Sepolia for them.
And if not L2s, yeah, I don't know if there's another group that we could get to like spam Gordy and hit a different set of nodes. I guess if you're listening to this and looking for something to do, oh, Proto, yeah.
So we are looking at testing on Gertie, starting with layer 2 DevNet.
Nice.
Once we go past like internal DevNet work, only then we can go to like more production testnets, and then like towards development of final stretch for mainnet testing. Now, spamming blobs, yes, we can generate some traffic on the DevNet. Without argue that to get real testing, we want to update the public layer 2 testnets. That may take some time.
Do you have a feel for like how long it would take you?
So we consider our testnets as a more production environment where users, dApps rely on the stability of these networks. And it's the choice to go and update the DevNet first.
Yeah.
This means that we aim for 1 or 2 weeks of testing on DevNet before we go and try any updates on a testnet.
Got it. So it's like at the earliest, it would probably take another month for Gordy to be updated.
It's at least a few weeks away.
Yeah.
Like the other timeline that's interesting here is how much a layer 2 should take for their public testnets, and how much the layer 1 here accommodates, since a stable layer 1 target here is important for layer 2 governance and for upgrades that do not rush a proof change or a change that affects the layer 2 security. So the longer running the rollout period is of a layer 2, the more important it is to have sufficient layer 1 test time to prepare for a mainnet upgrade.
And I guess, do we see a risk that 4844 is somehow inadequate for L2s? Like, obviously, you can imagine it being on mainnet for like months before, and L2 chooses to use it. That's probably fine, but like, I guess, yeah, what's like the minimum amount of confirmation we want that this is quote unquote usable, and do we sort of already have that? Because I know there were some.
In terms of capacity,
Yep.
I think we're very close. What I'm more concerned with is tooling infrastructure around blobs. Many RPC providers, for example, they serve the JSON RPC, but not the beacon layer RPC. And so a lot of infrastructure that has been built around layer 2s relies on the JSON RPC, but not on this new HTTP endpoint that serves the actual blob data. So there's more infra to update on the outside of the layer 1.
Right, and I guess that's I would definitely not block L1 on like the ecosystem adopting, because they can add support for it whenever. But I guess my question is more like, is there something about the consensus change itself where we feel like we'd need additional validation from L2s or some other like stakeholder before moving to mainnet, or should we try and keep moving towards mainnet as quickly or efficiently as we can, and then I guess, yeah, it's better, I think, to be in a spot where like it's on mainnet and people just have to adopt it than a spot where like it's not live because we're waiting on some external dependency. But I want to be sure that's like a reasonable assumption and there's not something on the L2 side that's like we may be missing. Yeah. And Ansgar has a comment in the chat that there's an 4844 L2 readiness roll call next Wednesday. So that they'll bring that up there as well, and they can report back on Thursday's ACDC. So we should probably discuss that further there, but yeah, I guess for now, does anyone see, like, we should get L2s to test this as quickly as possible, and so if Optimism can do it on Gordy in the next couple of weeks, that's great. once the DevNet has been done. If for Arbitrum we're waiting on Sepolia, then we should probably get Sepolia upgraded. And then if there's other L2s not on this call listening, yeah, if someone wants to start testing Gordy sooner, that's probably just some valuable data for us to obtain.
Okay, so my takeaway from that would be that we continue spamming, but rather than a target of 6, we'll just have a target of 3, so that if someone else wants to join in, then they're not priced out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, and just one more thing I do want to mention. These are alpha numbers, and we kind of want to know what client teams are looking for so that we can start customizing these sort of analysis like every week or something from the data from the last week. Right now, it looks like in the average case, blobs are propagated on the network under the 2-second mark. There are some P95 values at the 4 or 5-second mark, but in general, attestation deadlines seem to be hit. And it doesn't matter how many blobs we have. It looks like block propagation is not affected, which is good news. And yeah, in general, all the numbers look quite good so far. So yeah, I guess the question is, what else do we want to collect from here? Is something missing?
Oh, there's a question.
And just to Potus's message, yeah, the builder is being used regularly on Gurley as well. We have MEV boost enabled in at least all of our validators. We haven't tried sending blobs directly through them, but they have been gossiped via our nodes. But we can try sending it directly to the relay.
Oh, okay. And there's a comment saying Flashbots has delivered some payloads with blobs. Nice. Okay. Any other thoughts from client teams or others about Gordy specifically?
Very, very quickly after the non-finality was over.
Oh, nice. Sweet. Anything else? Okay. So next up, we had this JSON RPC discussion a few weeks ago on the testing call about adding blob gas prices to a few JSON RPC methods. We were hoping to have more discussion on it, but it does seem pretty stale. I guess, yeah, I like kind of your last person who's commented. Do you think we should go ahead and merge this? Does this need more input? This feels like something that would be nice to have, obviously, before mainnet and potentially before one of the next test nets so that we can expose the blob-based fee in JSON RPC.
Yeah, I think for one thing, we had this PR to 444 1.5 weeks ago, trying to rename gas price to base fee with respect to blobs. And I think we probably want to move forward with that. And so if we do that, that's going to change the name of the RPC method from blob gas price to blob base fee. So that needs to be updated. But in general, this seems like something that we need to be doing. I'm just flying a little blind because I'm not sure who the consumers of these things are, and they're not really stepping up to say, like, this is what we would like this to look like. So I'm kind of just following what has existed in the past and moving in the same direction with the blob fees. But, you know, for instance, I don't remember if this was the testing call or the last call, but Roberto was saying for them, they're just calculating the blob base fee using the previous header. So people are kind of getting around it. So the question is like, if people are getting around it, do we need to expose this RPC method? I'm not sure. It seems like the right thing to do, but
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for someone to say like, "I want this is what we want."
So assuming we go ahead and merge that PR with a name change on 4844, then like we change those names. Maybe like somebody to ask. I know Ryan from Infura has been in the Discord following a lot of these devnets. So like Infura might be a good basically consumer of this. If anybody else has thoughts, it's PR486 in the execution APIs repo. Is there anyone who like?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna agree with you. And I was wanting to know if anyone was opposed to 8095, the changing the name from gas price to base fee, because I'll just merge that in the next hour, if not. Great.
Okay. So yeah, let's merge the PR to 4844, and then maybe like do one last ping on the Discord and explicitly tag Brian about the JSON RPC one, and assuming there's no objection, we merge that one as soon as it's updated with the new names.
Okay.
Sweet. And then, okay, next up, so there was a comment by Andrew about deploying the 4788 contract on all the other networks. So we deployed it on Hostkey and Sepolia this week, and we weren't sure if it makes sense to deploy the 4788 contract on mainnet now, or if we'd rather wait to see the other testnets fork before we do that. I don't know if anyone has thoughts about this.
Given deploy address is a function of the code, I think it's fine to deploy now and might as well deploy now. Meaning in the event that there is some last minute change to that code due to functionality change or bug or something, it would deploy to a different address. So we don't like shoot ourselves in the foot by already having something there. So given the manual deploy, I'd say while top of mind, just do it.
Okay. Does anyone want to volunteer to deploy it? I will refund your gas cost if you do. So I guess if first person who goes ahead and deploys it can post in the Alcor Devs channel the transaction hash. But yeah, let's try. Yes, Mario, I'll send back the gas cost of the first transaction for someone who deploys it and post it in Alcor Devs. I will not double it though. Sweet. Next up, Xiaowei posted this in the chat, but there is a new CL release being cut. I don't know if Xiaowei or is on the call, or otherwise Danny. Any thoughts, comments on that?
This was expected to go out Monday. It did not. And then the issue on Goerli came out, so we got in additional test vectors, and now it is immediately ready to go out after this call. It has the fork choice filter change. It has a number of other minor things which are not really substantive with respect to this, and it has the additional test. The intention would be that this is the target going forward, with the fork choice filter change being the main thing to have to accomplish, but also knowing that if on the next testnet you don't have that done, except in pretty crazy exceptional scenarios, you won't diverge. This has been discussed quite a bit on
Got
the
it.
Slayer call, so I don't think there's any additional context or discussion needed.
Got it. Okay. So I think those were all the sort of outstanding items around Dencun. In terms of timing, so on the last ACDE last year, we'd set the schedule for all three testnets. Gordy's already done. Sepolia is currently scheduled for January 30th, and then Holski is scheduled a week after that for February 7th. Our plan was to have a single client release for both those testnets, so that users can just download it once and be ready on both chains. And we only have to have like one sort of release cycle, one announcement, and so on. If we want to stick to that and give people at least a week to upgrade on Sepolia, it means we'd have to have client releases and the announcement out sometime around like Tuesday next week. Does this feel realistic for all client teams? Does anyone have a problem with that schedule, or should we, keep moving forward and announce Sepolia and Holski around Tuesday of next week? Okay, Teku saying it's okay. Yeah, and no one objecting, so I'll take that as a sign that we're good. Some +1 from Nethermind. Okay, last call. Otherwise, otherwise we'll move forward. And obviously, if we see something go terribly wrong on Sepolia, we can always cancel the whole ski fork. But yeah, I think this will simplify things a bit for users to have both. So great. Okay, let's stick to it. All the numbers are in EIP 7569. So the epoch on Sepolia is 132608. Epoch on Holski is 29696, and then the corresponding timestamps are linked in that table. Anything else on Dencun at all? Okay, sweet. Then moving on to the next fork, Prague/Electra. So I compiled all the proposals earlier this week that at least have been put up so far. There's three of them that specifically, or three people that asked to talk about four things specifically today. So I think it probably makes sense to go through those first, and then hear from all the client teams what they're thinking in terms of prioritization, both in terms of specific EIPs, but also this higher level conversation around where Verkle fits in, and how we potentially want to approach the next two forks rather than just the next EL fork. So yeah, to kick it off, we have, I don't know if Fubar is on the call.
Hey, yeah, I am.
Yes. Okay, so I'll post your your update in the chat, but yeah, take it away about 374.
Awesome. Does screen share work for
It
a
should,
little
yeah.
presentation or? Okay, let me get that going. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, we see your screen.
Can you see this? Awesome. And I'll send the, I'll just dive into it. So yeah, hey, great to meet you, everyone. I'm Fubar. May have seen me on Twitter. First time kind of touching the core dev stuff, so appreciate you bearing with me. Have done a lot of app development.
Sorry, your presentation is like stuck at loading, so I don't know if you maybe it's like in another screen or something on your.
Yeah, I'll just I'll just share entire screen and see if that works.
Yeah.
All right, how's that?
It's loading on my end. Let's see if it loads.
Still
Yeah,
nothing?
no. Okay.
Okay, does this work? Can you
Still
see
loading.
this without?
Let me try to
Okay,
kick you off and see if I can.
that's okay. I can also just shoot the link here and talk
Yeah.
through things. Not a
Oh,
huge
okay.
deal.
Some people are seeing it, so yeah, maybe just shoot the link in the chat in parallel, and it might end up
Okay,
loading on mine. Okay, so I think
here we go.
we're getting there. So
Awesome. All right, we'll share and can. All right, we got the links. Perfect. So yeah, key high level thing is I think there's a massive opportunity for a core UX level upgrade that both increases EVM dominance relevance and saves literal hundreds of millions of dollars for users at the same time. I wrote up a more in-depth article here that you can dive into, but the key idea is that batch transactions for EOAs add a whole swath of benefits. They fix stale approval attacks, which have taken 100 million plus from retail, including 3 separate attacks in the last month. They reduce a lot of developer overhead, speaking from personal experience of people not having to embed quirky native multi-calls within their protocols. Also reduces, it's a bit of a free lunch on the state growth side of things. Currently, you've got all this overhead for mempool propagation, signature verification for sequential transactions, when really you just want kind of one signature across the whole thing. So able to get more actions, more chain usage without any additional client node burdens, and also able to remove some of the assumptions we've got on trusted intermediaries like private relays and whatnot. So yeah, the key. Most of this is just focused on the user and dev experience side, but do have a bit at the end where we can dive into the specific EIPs. Although I think there are people more skilled than me to discuss that. So a quick example on stale approvals and how that goes bad. I think that the approval pattern in Ethereum is good for some things, but has been overused and gotten a lot of people wrecked as a result. So for something like a long-standing OpenSea ask, I want to sell this NFT for 1 ETH, that's a good usage of approvals. For something like I just want to put my asset into a protocol, like I want to swap Tether for ETH on Uniswap, then it's not actually desirable on the app side or the user side to have to constantly be having to do this approval for it to be stale, left open. A lot of apps have this dangerous infinite approval pattern, and we've seen this get exploited time and time again. Just last 30 days, for example, you had the NFT trader exploit, 2-year-old contract, several $1 million worth of assets drained. Not because they were actively participating in the exploit, just because they'd done an action 2 years ago and forgotten / didn't have the bandwidth to revoke. Same thing with Floor Protocol. And then just yesterday or 2 days ago, Bridge, you had a lot of people get their assets drained from stale approvals on a bridge. And these are, I picked recent relevant ones, but these are things that happen over and over again. And so these are frankly all fixed with a batch transaction pattern. So I think that there's a lot of user leakage and like Ethereum experience improvement that can happen from that. There's huge on protocol UX side. I know that natively enshrining multi-call is something that can be done. Most people don't know how to do it. In my work on audits, you kind of have to manually push people to get it there. I think coalescing around a single standard for the entire space makes a much better DevX. Yeah, state growth, as we said, you've got fewer transactions floating around in the mempool for the same level of actions, less overhead from sequential transactions that really do want to be next to each other. And I think something that's not maybe well understood as I was diving into this is you actually get better 1559-esque like gas volatility spreading. Because if a user is trying to do multiple actions in a row, like approve, swap, deposit, they can't leave their computer until that final transaction is going out into the world. So they often have to overpay on the first ones. They overpay on approve, they overpay on swap, just so they can express their actual gas preference on that last bit. So I think there's a bit of spreading. If you could batch 3-ish transactions, send it to the mempool for a couple hours and sit it there, then you get better queuing on that front and better state growth. So, and then of course there's the risk of intermediaries, private relays unbundling things either maliciously or accidentally. I think this makes the relaying space a lot more open and permissionless because there's less need to rely on reputation as collateral. So enshrining batch transactions there removes it. Basically, so my strong opinion is that batch transactions for EOAs of some form need to ship in the next hard fork. Massive upgrade on security, on UX, on state growth, on demand limiting, on kind of obscure things like private relay, trust vectors. And seems like the two key EIPs are 3074 from Light Clients, who's been amazingly helpful in talking through a lot of this, and also a slimmer, simpler, but less fleshed out 5806. Two approaches here. I think most people on the call are familiar with auth and off call. You essentially provide an ECDSA signature to a trusted invoker, much like a 4337 singleton entry point, and then that invoker can execute code on your behalf. The Yoav Weiss has done a lot of great work on this and thought through how to mitigate some of the security vectors by assigning each specific call. I think that's also an interesting approach. And then 5806 is just kind of very simple, no invokers, just a new transaction type that lets EOAs delegate call any contract directly and execute that delegate call code within its own context. So obviously these are all exclusive, but I think that one of them needs to get shipped and upgrade the whole EOA experience. So that's those are my thoughts from both from a user perspective, massive security upgrade, from an app developer perspective, massive UX upgrade, and I think it adds some benefits to the core chain consensus mechanism as well. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks for sharing. Any questions on the presentations or write-up from anyone on the call? Ansgar?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, of course, great presentation. I just wanted to say that from my point of view, kind of looking at specifically those three kind of potential EIP paths proposed, two comments I would have. First of all, I think those three specifically are relatively heavy-handed. I think, first of all, like the alternative proposal by Yoav as an alternative to 3074, I think that just has been underexplored. I don't personally think that makes a lot of sense. And then the other one, the Haydn's, while I think it's interesting, I also do think that like like people have talked a lot about delegate call the UA accounts directly, and it runs into similar issues. So I think out of those three, probably 3074 is the most realistic. But as we talked about for the last 2 years already regarding the AP, it's very heavy-handed. So I'm not sure if it's a good fit for mainnet. So I think the most realistic, if there is a strong need for bundling, I would say the most realistic here would be to have a more new EIP or reuse one of the older ones that was very limited in scope just to the bundling use case specifically. So that's comment one. I think a narrow EIP here would make more sense. And then comment two would be that I personally philosophically think that for a lot of these more user-focused improvements to the EVM, we should try and more kind of leave this initial experimentation with new features like this to layer 2s that are more nimble in shipping anyway. And now that we're starting to see with roll call kind of like a standardization process around EIPs or EIP equivalents on the layer 2 side, I think personally, philosophically, I would much rather see these kind of things shipped on layer 2s and then later brought to mainnet. But yeah, so those are my 2 comments.
Yeah, that's helpful. I guess to respond to the first, definitely my desire is some form of thing gets shipped. So if there's a way to slim things down, use the learnings of the past 2 years, it all sounds very interesting. On the second comment, push all the innovation out to the L2s. I think that's a good long-term plan, and works quite well on things like new cryptography precompile. But for things where there's a high coordination cost, good batch transactions require 3 actors to all coordinate. You need the core consent. You need the core chain to support it. You also need the wallets to support it. And you also need the apps to be able to push this. I'm not sure that the fragmented approach gets the job done. And I do think that in terms of how do you spread the EVM? How do you make this a good default experience? There is some room for real winning pushes still from the core L1 itself.
Quick question to follow on Ansgar's point, though. So you said that in the 3 actors that you kind of need to coordinate, one of them being the L1. Why wouldn't the L2 sequencing their own transactions serve as a substitute?
So yeah, if you rely on centralized sequencer, then you get some of the benefits of like unlikely to unbundle, for example, but the user still has to sign multiple sequential transactions and so on. You train people to click that are carefully inspecting things, and you've replaced the role of the trusted private relay bundler with the trusted centralized sequencer, and not super robust.
William?
Yes, I just wanted to comment that I don't think layer 2 should be treated like a feature testnet. The developers making layer 2s care a lot about compatibility with mainnet. And if they deployed a feature that had a tentative specification, then when it finally comes to mainnet, even if it has the same opcode number, there might be differences in behavior, and those would be technical debt for them. So they aren't especially interested in doing that role for us, usually. That's all.
Right. Okay. So I think we can probably discuss that on like the L2 call, whether or not, we'd want this in its current form. This in its current form, or potentially a tweak of it to be deployed on L2s versus L1s. And yeah, okay, I'm just reading Georgios's comments. Is there like a clear next step or that people would would want to provide here?
I mean, this is an outsider's perspective, but it seems like maybe some of the confusion comes from 2 separate questions being jumbled. The first question being like, are EOA batch transactions desirable? And then the second one being what's the right implementation for that? And you've got I think a lot of fragmented views on the second bit, but less clarity on the first one. So maybe that's the key thing to answer first.
Yeah, and I don't know if anyone has an answer right now off the top of your head. Ahmad?
Yeah, so looking at the other solution that Fubar talked about seems to be harder to secure than the current implementation of 3.0.7.4, as you can't really parse a delegate call easily when it comes inside the wallet. Whereas with 3074, you can parse the call data, the address, the amount of gas being used, the Ethereum you're going to pay, etc. So it's easier to reason about for wallet to implement something for the user to actually look at when they're signing this transaction. Then now looking into the L2 perspective, my personal opinion is that I agree with William. L2s are not going to introduce this EIP unless there is some kind of commitment that this EIP will eventually land on mainnet as it is spec'd without any changes. And that's just my personal opinion.
Thanks. Andrew?
I think there was a concern from Aragon team members about the original EP 3074 that the authorization is not revocable. So we are opposed to that version of 3074, but the other version by of Vice, where the permission are revocable, or like EP 5806 seem to be more reasonable.
To be clear, 3074 is now revocable as of about 1 month ago. We added the nonce to the authorization message, so when that nonce is passed, the authorization is no longer eligible to be auth called.
Oh, I see.
I would call that expirable, not revocable, because you said an expiration. Revocable is like, I changed my mind, and nothing changes, but it's revoked.
I mean,
so it is expirable. It's an improvement.
We don't have to nitpick the exact definition here.
I would not call it revocable, however.
Okay, I disagree.
Ben, you have?
In answer to Fubar's first question on whether batch transactions from the users are desirable, I'd say definitely, because it's not having them means we have some pretty weird UX patterns that generally end up being quite unsafe. And as he mentioned, you then end up where, if you've got to do 3-4 transactions just to do one action, you're sort of training users to blindly go, yep, in their wallet. And then they go to a phishing site and they get multiple transactions coming through and they go, yep, and they fall into this bad pattern.
And also, I think it's important to note that there's, in the absence of batch transactions, apps have developed even more unsafe approaches. I'd say the status quo today is something like a seaport order that can, that's not even a transaction. It's an EIP 712 typed, arbitrarily nested array that gets people wiped 50 apes at a time. And it's not even simulatable. You've got the same issues with things like a single malicious permit2 signature can then take all the assets you've approved in Uniswap. So what enshrining batch transactions in the protocol does, it doesn't introduce new security risks. It moves it from these opaque 712 non-simulatable messages into actual simulation core, into things that wallets can simulate. So batch transactions are already here in an unsafe way. The question is, can you improve them and enshrine them so that we're not stuck in a blur/permit2 world forever?
Yeah, following up on that, where you do an off-chain signature, which was sort of like an intermediary solution, that's like a very dangerous pattern, and it's off-chain and it lives there forever, and somebody can just insert your signature at a later date that they're choosing, which has caused a bunch of hacks as well.
Just you have to be mindful of time. So I think, yeah, this definitely provides context to a lot of the L1 teams. And also, I think shows that maybe some of them aren't up to speed on like the latest designs for this stuff. So obviously, there's like the three IPs that people can review. I think in terms of next steps, one, like now, L1 teams can figure out how they feel about 3074 or one of the other alternatives, and whether we'd want to move forward with something like that in the next fork. Two, I think there is a discussion to be had on the L2 side about whether or not we'd want to implement 3074 or again some version of it first there. And Ansgar has a comment around how they are trying to figure out the right framework to do that. I guess if people have questions or concerns, like we can use, is the like ETH Magicians thread about 3074 still the best place to do that as people sort of review it?
Yeah, that's a good place.
Okay.
Also, one of the channels on Discord, any of the transaction batching UX channels, just feel free to tag me. I'll respond.
Got it. Oh, I'm not saying we're necessarily looking for extra feedback, Georgios, but just if some L1 teams like review this more deeply, like in the next week or so or whatever, and they have questions, then yeah, we can use both the channel on the R&D Discord or ETH Magicians as the place to discuss those. Yeah, I think it probably makes sense to move on to the next ones at this point, though. And yeah, thanks again, Fubar, for coming on and sharing both the write-up and the slides.
Yeah, thank you.
Sweet. Okay, next
Last
one.
thing.
Oh, sorry, please.
I just want to say one last thing on this. Like, there is a lot of demand from the user space for something to improve the UX on L1. So if 3074 isn't the path forward, it would be great for client teams to think a bit about this over the next couple of weeks so we can try and come up with a proposal that we can put into the next fork.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, next up, set code. We had another, I guess, design overview. William, okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Can everyone hear me? Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
All right, cool. I hope this goes fast. So the common basis for all the design of set code, we're just modifying the code at the address that's executing. So code copy and code size still refer to the executing code. ext code copy, ext code size, ext code hash refer to the stored code. It's similar to delegate call in that regard. So new call scopes will execute the stored code. So the storage effectively happens immediately. And storages can be reverted like store. It fails inside of create context and it doesn't clear storage. These are the basic parameters of set code, but there's a few alternative designs that have come up in the process of designing set code. The most basic set code would have no restrictions. It's a simple design. It would work the same way as store. Store also has only the static call restriction. And so it would be difficult, however, to identify immutable code, and someone identified that it could have an issue with ERC 4337 because if a library that all of the validator step we're using for the alt mempool were to be toggled, then it could thrash that mempool and be a DOS vector. So with his help, developed a newer design that adds a restriction. The restriction is that you can only modify the currently executing code if it's your code. And so this allows it to be easy to prove that a contract is immutable. It would be easy for a wallet to know if it is approving a mutable contract. It would be easy for Etherscan to flag mutable code. Also, immutability, it can't be faked during execution. So you wouldn't be able to pretend during the scope of a transaction that you're immutable, get validated for some registry, and then change to mutable. So that's a nice property too. And then also it would prevent set code inside a delegate call, which would address the alt mempool DOS vector. And so this may be a more secure design. And it's probably a good restriction that could be removed if it was determined safe to do so, but probably a good way to launch. And the last parameter for the design of set code is that we could, instead of setting the code at the account, instead we could have the code be an immutable blob per account, and then have the accounts have a new field, the code address, that would allow them to indirect the blob that is their code. And then there'd be opcodes to set the code address, to read the code address, and then so this is some other way to implement it that I'm interested in knowing how good you think this is and how compatible the code address spec is with Verkle. Because when you do Verkle trees, you're likely going to cement this field in. And so either the code address would be mutable or the code would be mutable. Either would be satisfactory for my purposes. The current specification is the belongs to specification, where you can only change your code. And then it's a nice spec because it implicitly captures the delegate call and create scenarios, and it's pretty easy to know whether you're allowed to set code. Other designs were slightly more complicated. Again, the reason we need to do this is that account abstraction can't delegate call if it wants to be competitive for DEX protocols because of priority gas auctions. So if you have a proxy behind delegate call and sload, then you're not going to be able to compete for Uniswap v4. You're going to be super late to any trade, and you're going to have a systematic disadvantage. And so if you're trading on DEXs, things like 4337 aren't really viable, whereas that's why MEV bots are using the create2 self-destruct pattern for their upgrades. It's because it's a really good user experience, and I would like to preserve that user experience so that I don't have to move all of my assets to a new account every time I want to support a new callback. That's all for this presentation. I defer back to you.
Thanks, William. Any questions? Marius, I see you have a comment in the chat around breaking gas estimation. So I don't know, William, if you maybe want to answer that first, and then if there's other questions, people can raise their hands.
Gas estimation is already broken by SStore for the same reason. You can branch according to code just the same way you can branch according to storage. And so any change at all actually impacts gas estimation, and this is one of the main uses of alt mempools and relays such as flashbots.
Got it. Any other questions, comments? Oh, Guillaume?
Yeah, so there was a question asked about the feasibility in Verkle of the third option. I mean, I see no reason why this would not work. However, I mean, on a personal note, I don't really see how this whole set code story could end well. There's so many potential hacks with this. Yeah, I would not consider that in the Verkle tree spec for sure, but I don't think we should consider that, period.
Got it. And okay, there's a specific question by like clients around if we can do this with delegate call already, why do we need set code?
Yes. So delegate call is unviable if you're trading on dexes because of priority gas auctions. So your ability to trade on a dex, if you're competing with them for storage, as you're currently saying, this is a DOS vector for nodes, it's the same. If you're trying to trade and only one of those trades can win, the one that uses the least gas is going to be the one with a huge advantage. That's because they're going to be able to bid higher and get the trade.
Got it. Okay, and there's the last question. Oh, sorry.
Marius has a question. Yeah. Says, so this is only about the gas usage of delegate call. No, I don't think that's all it is. It's having used the self-destruct upgrade pattern, even when you have to wait a whole transaction, I see its superiority. It was so good. If you don't need to use storage, you've been using this already, and dozens of power users have been upgrading this way. It's just it saves so much gas per transaction. I don't think there's a way to price delegate call that would fix this. I think that not having to delegate call at all is just a huge advantage.
So I think this proposal will backfire quite badly for most users, and because people will create gotcha contracts where they will be able to set the code and then break it. So I think it's a net negative for most people, and maybe there's an advantage for the 15 or the handful of power users that use this, but I don't think we should do this for these people and potentially bring normal users at risk with this.
I don't see it as that demographic, rather that only a handful will be able to keep trading on dexes if we don't allow everyone to do it this way. Currently, there's a huge cost to migrating all of your stuff, and you're only able to do that if you're a high frequency trader. Otherwise, you're just going to suffer or go back to just using the one-by-one transaction method described. I do agree with some of the sympathies in the comments regarding how we just need better account abstraction. That is true.
Okay, this is probably a good place to wrap this one up. And again, I think if this is something client teams want to see in the fork, they can definitely signal for it. Yeah, thanks a lot, William, for coming on. Okay, last one before we get into what client teams want into the forks. Mike wanted to talk about two CL EIPs that would have implications on the EL side, and so to have people be aware of those and what it would mean. I guess, first the value it would bring, and then second, what it would mean in terms of work on the EL side if these were to happen. Yeah, EIP 7251, 7547. Mike, do you want to give an overview?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Tim. And I'll try and be super quick. I know there's still some left on the agenda. So I guess I'll give a quick overview for the two EIPs, talk about how they relate to the execution layer, and then, if there's time to field a few questions, happy to do those. Otherwise, please reach out offline. I should be pretty easy to connect to. So yeah, I guess both the EIPs I just sent in the chat. The first one is EIP 7251, which we've kind of been talking about for a while, but it's this idea of increasing the max effective balance. So just super TLDR, the current max effective balance is 32 ETH, which means both the minimum balance to become a validator is 32 ETH, and the maximum balance that a validator can have is 32 ETH. This has a few implications on the big staking pool side of things. It means that they have to essentially spin up many validators to account for all the stake that they want to put into the consensus layer. So just for an example, Coinbase has like 120,000 or more validators currently that are kind of controlled by the single entity. So they're almost redundant in that regard. On the small staker side, this means that any stake you have above 32 ETH automatically gets withdrawn and doesn't like earn compounding rewards until you have enough to deploy another validator. So a whole new 32 ETH. So generally speaking, increasing the maximum you can have while also keeping the minimum at 32 both benefits the large stakers because it allows them to consolidate, and this has like overall network health implications, and it also helps the small stakers insofar as they can have balance that's above 32 ETH but not 64 ETH, and they can get access to this automatic compounding. So yeah, that's kind of where I'll leave it in terms of the summary. There's a lot more written on this here. There's a kind of related work section in this gist. In terms of the execution layer, the way this relates is through EIP 7002, which asks that the execution layer withdrawal credential, which is kind of different than the signing key that's used for the consensus layer, can initiate an exit. So beyond this, the one important feature of 7251 would be to allow custom withdrawals that aren't necessarily full exits, also triggered from the execution layer. So the kind of use case here is if you have a validator with 100 ETH, you want to withdraw 2 ETH to pay your taxes or whatever, then you can do so without withdrawing the whole 100 ETH validator. And that request for that withdrawal could come from the withdrawal credential rather than from the validator signing key. And cool, I'll just run quickly into 7547. The TLDR here is that this EIP aims to enshrine inclusion lists in the protocol. The motivation for this can be seen on Tony's awesome dashboard, censorship.pix, which basically shows that because of the world we live in terms of MEV boost and block building, a huge number of blocks on Ethereum mainnet are built by a very small number of entities, and those entities usually choose to exclude some set of transactions. So the EIP itself is this kind of forced inclusion mechanism where validators, even if they aren't building the block for their slot, they can ensure that some set of transactions will get included. There's extensive research on this, mostly done by Vitalik and Francesco over the past like 3 years. The latest design is this no free lunch thing. So this has like a related work section and all the details you could want. But yeah, the implication on the execution layer side is that the block verification would now depend on this inclusion list. So the block would only be valid if it included the transactions that were specified by the inclusion list. Otherwise, it should be ignored and considered invalid. So yeah, this is my high level pitch. Again, these are mostly on the consensus layer side, but just wanted to kind of make sure that this audience was aware of these and kind of make sure that any questions that people have like, you know, a way to get in touch with me and there's a venue for that. So yeah, thanks for giving me the time, Tim. Happy to take some questions now, or if we should move on to the client team discussion, happy to do that as well.
We can take a couple of questions now if there's time and if there are questions. Ahmad?
So one question about increasing the max effective balance is, how does increasing it affect the inactivity leak in case there is a non-finalization in the network? Since the increase in the balance of the validator will mean that it will be able to attest for, or not attest for longer and still be still affect the network in a higher
yeah,
manner.
So the leak would still be proportional to the balance that you have. So if you're like a 32 ETH validator, you leak at some percentage per year, and if you're a 20,048 or sorry, 2048 ETH validator, you leak at that same rate.
That's right. That's right. I just remembered the equation. Never mind. That's actually valid what you're saying. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Oh, I'm just looking at light clients. How complete is the IL spec? Last time I looked, which will only be so effective because of stake consolidation. How does stake consolidation affect this?
I just mean if you're Coinbase and you're building 4 blocks in a row, you're only going to use non-empty IL lists whenever it's not you building the next block. If for some reason you're not allowed to include transactions in your blocks that are considered something that should be censored.
Right, right. So I guess this is a little speculative because we're not sure exactly how both the validator side decision process would be and also the builder side decision process, right? So, yeah, I don't want to speculate on what they would do. I guess in general, Tony wrote a piece. I don't have it on the top, but Tony wrote a piece called "Cumulative Non-Expiring Inclusion Lists," which kind of addresses this, and it makes it so that you could kind of specify how far in the future this thing could be enforced. I'm not sure about the necessity of that versus the complexity it adds, but it's definitely part of the discussion.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think this is something we should be looking pretty closely at. If not for this fork, then hopefully for a fork soon. So yeah, that's generally my thoughts.
Yeah, and we're kind of in this slightly delicate situation where a number of the large builders have started censoring a subset of transactions. There is a few builders that are not. If those builders decide to start censoring, then it could quickly turn into both like a kind of bad look memetically if 90+% of blocks are censored, and also like legit degradation in UX in terms of getting those transactions in. So right now, I would say with the situation is very unstable, and the more I hear from builders and validators, the more I think that getting some enshrined inclusion mechanism feels very important, especially as regulatory stuff continues to be uncertain.
Yeah, it would be better to be proactive with this than reactive in the event of censorship, like seriously impacting users.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. I think, yeah, we could probably wrap up here unless there's any urgent questions. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for sharing all that. Okay, so I think, yeah, the next big chunk, and this might consume the rest of the call, is, I guess, given all this context and what we've discussed on the previous ACD and just like the general set of proposals, it'd be good to hear from client teams, what they think should be prioritized in the next fork, where they have the strongest opinions. And I think as part of that, probably the biggest question is how we feel about Verkle. We'll focus more of the next call going deep into Verkle. But I think, yeah, from a high level perspective, figuring out, do we want to do Verkle right now? Do we potentially want to do another fork with another set of EIPs prior to Verkle? And if so, which EIPs are most urgent to include there? That seems like the biggest question to answer. So yeah, if any team wants to kick it off, Giorgio's just shared. I guess, yeah, maybe Giorgio's, you had this write up already. Do you want to give a quick overview of that, and then yeah, others can chime in after that?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So I shared the write up in the chat. The TLDR that I think is that momentum is very important, and we have a good jive right now of shipping things. So I think the Breath team view that we should be able to ship something in 2024. And I think we should optimize for shipping something in 2024. And to that extent, I think that the most important EIPs to ship are the staging related ones that Mike mentioned, in particular 7002. And beyond that, I think we should be shooting for isolated one-person jobs on the EVM side. So EOF, I know it's a painful topic for some. We took a close look. We think it's doable in, by one person in a couple months. Other ideas that we are interested in are increasing the max blobs post Cancun, but I think we need to do a lot of data work before we can see this, so we don't really want to push for anything like that. So our strong man would be 7002. There was another EIP about introducing deposits in the EL state, which was good for the CL. The BLS curve EIP, I think everybody knows how to use BLS 12381 by now. It's literally everywhere. I don't see any argument against. EOF, let's discuss some scope and commit on something. And yeah, that's where we're at. And given that we have it written down, I think worth giving time for other teams to speak more. And I'm happy to discuss async.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good starting point. Any other team have thoughts or perspective they want to share?
Yeah, I can talk about Aragon's perspective. I think that we should definitely deliver big, serious fundamental improvements that require a lot of engineering. Because I believe that Ethereum has the strongest engineering talent pool among all blockchains. And if we don't do difficult things, then maybe nobody will. So I think we should deliver Verkle and EOF. The main question, how we schedule, whether we schedule Verkle first and then EOF or the other way around. I think Guillaume has a point that Verkle is already is an epic upgrade, and EOF can potentially complicate it further. So perhaps it makes sense to deliver Verkle first and then EOF. And then, like once we agree on that order, we can maybe bolt on some relatively isolated things. If we deliver Verkle on the first upgrade, maybe say potential. I think that like tackling batch transactions is important. So say we decide that we are happy with the 5806, so then we can potentially bolt on 5806 on the first upgrade, say Verkle.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other team?
So, Nethermind, we would like to see small fork with EIPs such as execution layer exits, BLS precompile, supply validator deposits. And after small fork, we would like to focus on Verkle trees. And additionally, we would slightly prefer to focus on EIP for force than EOF, if all teams have a capacity to do it. And also, we would be happy to implement any account abstraction EIPs if there's clear decision what EIPs we want to implement for account abstraction.
Got it. Thank you.
So for Geth, I cannot really speak for the team, but from what I would like to see is I would love to see Verkle first, but I don't think that realistically don't think that the majority is for Verkle first. So I would also go with the Nethermind approach of doing a smaller hard fork first, and then while working on Verkle, and the smaller hard fork, in my opinion, should contain 7002 6110 2537 and another one that I don't remember, but like basically the validator deposits and exits, EL deposits and exits, and BLS precompiles. Oh, the SecP 256K R1 as well. I think there would be a small set for a small fork, and we will have time for building Verkle. Just to add to this, I think actually there was some pushback on 6110, but yeah, I think everybody else in the team that I'm aware of, at least, is for a small fork before Verkle.
Got it.
Yeah, the Besu team here has very similar thoughts as Marius / Geth and the Nethermind team, focusing first on a smaller fork with a lot of the same EIPs like the BLS precompile, the SEC 256R1 precompile, the 6110, 7002, focusing on some EL related deposit stuff. And then, between a driver of EOF or, as Nethermind stated, something like 4.4s, it's kind of loosely, kind of a toss-up there. I would kind of defer to others on this. I know some on the Besu maintainers have strong opinions about EOF, so I'm speaking mostly for a subset of maintainers here.
Yeah, I'll speak for EOF. Sorry for not being on last week's call. I was on vacation, so I guess the voice wasn't loud enough there. But as far as EOF and all these other EL deposit level ones, it's important to note that the engineering commitment is fairly orthogonal. The engineers that know the most about EOF on the client teams are not necessarily ones that know the most about the consensus layer changes. So, one of the concerns that we're going to be splitting engineering effort, I don't think is quite the same, because as Georgios pointed out, it's very few engineer times, because we already had this mostly functioning with Nethermind, Besu, and Geth in January of last year, and they're mostly iterative changes. So the hard work's been done for EOF. So that's my opinion on EOF. And the other changes proposed I'm in favor of the fork before Verkle, and the other scoping sounds reasonable to me.
I think that was all the EL teams, but did I miss anyone? Lucas?
So I would add quickly. So our concerns for EOF are mostly on the testing side, because this is very consensus issue problematic. Like, it's easy to make a consensus issue. So I would really love to hear from for example, Hive testing team, what they think about EOF.
Hey, yes, I think we can make. We have some pretty good ideas on how to do EOF and also Verkle, which is just to introduce more testing fixture formats for EOF specifically. So what we can do is, now that we have the execution spec tests, we can generate a definition of how the EOF can fail, for example, and do this testing across all the teams by doing the fixture format for this specifically. So I think that can alleviate a lot of the testing burden on EOF and also on Verkle. We're planning on doing the same thing for this complex upgrades on the EL side. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a couple comments on EOF in the chat around a finalized spec. So I don't know if anyone who's familiar with just like the latest spec work can give an update.
So the spec as it's written today could be closed. We're just mostly arguing over smaller, maybe one more opcode here. How are we going to do the final nibble integration of the exchange opcode? There is a push to move everything to variable width, but I think that's come a little too late in the process, because that would basically be restarting the spec and doing large things. So what we have written in the EOF repository, modulo stuff found in testing could ship as EOF. If we get we would want to do a final discussion with the Solidity and Viper engineers who are on the call, but it doesn't seem like it's a very long list at all. So it could be done in a week or 3.
Got it. Guillaume?
Yeah, so just maybe a reminder, the problem in this deciding which one goes first is really about the complexity of Verkle and the fact that the more we wait, the longer the transition is going to take. So yeah, if you start adding EOF before Verkle, well, first it's going to complexify Verkle because now you have 2 types of contracts to handle, and now with Verkle, the code itself ends up in the tree and is going to be treated differently, right? So you're going to make like increase the complexity of Verkle unnecessarily, and on top of that, you're going to make the conversion much slower and much more risky because it will be pushed back by as much time as you need to deliver EOF, which is not a simple change. This being said, we in Verkle have to go through the state and convert everything. So if, and Pavel is supposed to get back to us on that, if it would be possible to convert all the legacy code during the Verkle conversion, then I would say let's do EOF first, because then we can turn everything to EOF and forget about legacy code. It's not guaranteed that it's possible. In fact, it's very unlikely to be possible. But if it's possible, then it's totally worth waiting. But otherwise, there's no good reason to do EOF first because, yeah, like I said, the state is growing. We have a very difficult problem ahead of us. We need to tackle it first. EOF is really nice, but it's just that. It's nice to have. It's not like a catastrophic problem that we're going to face sooner or later.
So one specific problem that EOF solves with its structure and validation is the whole notion of uncapping code size. There's a lot of push on Twitter to increase code size from 24K, and that cannot safely be done in legacy code, whereas it can be done safely in EOF code. And another problem is some of the goals of EOF code are to explicitly break things that legacy does that we don't want in the future, such as code visibility. We don't want to be able to look at the executing code as part of the execution, modify it, and manipulate it. We want to separate that code introspection out. And also, we're taking the opportunity to remove some of the gas observability issues that are observed in prior versions of the legacy code. So one of the points of EOF is to break these things that have caused problems and get rid of them so that in EOF world, it can't be done. So because of that, you can't translate all legacy code into EOF code. You can probably do most of it, but there's some explicit places where they're, depending upon these features, and those we just can't translate there. Now, the longer that we wait to put EOF in there is the longer that we have to deal with more legacy code coming in fractured forms, such as the diamond pattern, versus looking into safer ways to uncap code size and get, these app developers are begging for it, just not as loudly as the DeFi people for things like getting rid of, revocations. But there's a lot of desire to increase the 24K limit, and we need a better validation system before we can do that safely.
Okay, so we're basically at time. So I guess maybe to summarize a couple things that we've heard so far. One, it seems like everyone except potentially Aragon would want to see like a small fork before Verkle, and then Aragon's view is like, if we do a fork before Verkle, it should include something substantial, not just a bunch of small things. So we should do hard engineering work. I think in that context, the 3 EIPs that everybody seemed on the same page about were 6110, 7002, so the 2 validator-related EIPs, and then the BLS precompile. And then whether we move forward with Verkle or EOF or potentially something like 4.4s, even though it's not quite a consensus change, but have that be like the quote unquote hard engineering thing we do in parallel to this small EIPs, that seems a bit more consensus. So would it make sense to move forward with those 3 EIPs, so 6110, 7002, and then the BLS precompile as like the basis for our small fork that's targeted for sometime next year. On the next call, spend most of the call discussing the big three proposals, so EOF, Verkle, and 4.4s, and then figure out, which fork they would sort of fall into. So, agree that like there will be a small thing likely before Verkle, and then the sort of minimum set that we have consensus on so far is like 6110, 7002, and 2537, and then discuss the three big things on the next call, and see how they can fit in. Does that make sense to people? Or I guess any objections to this?
Well, I have one question. So I think there is some opposition to EOF in principle. So maybe okay, maybe we can decide on the next call. But I would like to hear whether people agree that EOF is a good idea in principle or not.
Right. Yeah, and I think, okay, it's probably worth getting into that on the next call. And I think in the case where we did not want to move forward with EOF, and we wanted to have a separate fork before Verkle, the other thing we could spend extra engineering resources on is 4.4s, like history expiry, right? Which doesn't actually require a hard fork, but it does require hard work by client teams. Does that seem reasonable? I guess, yeah, and maybe the thing I'm trying to say is it seems like everybody's like in favor of the three small EIPs. There's still some questions around what the big ones are, but at least we can, set those three and then discuss the big ones more thoroughly on the next call. Oh, POTUS? Oh, POTUS, we can't hear you. Oh. Okay, we're already a couple minutes over time, so I'll open just like a draft PR for that, and again we can continue the discussion next call. And I think we didn't quite have time to get to the point about Verkle, but one thing that would be valuable is if people can share any questions, concerns that they'd like to discuss around either EOF, Verkle, or 4.4s. Either on Awkward Devs or on the agenda for the next call, so that the folks who are championing those can take them into account. Yeah, and we can discuss later. And I know we also didn't quite get to the Besu incident. Matt, would you be okay if we move that to the start of the next call so that we're sure we actually cover it?
Yeah, not a problem.
Cool. Okay, so let's do that. Yeah, any final closing thoughts or comments before we wrap up?
Can I just say something quickly?
Yes. Oh, please. Yes.
Good. So just two unrelated comments. One of them is my only objection to your statement was that to ship to next year. And the reason being that many teams may have waited in their decisions to have a small fork, the idea that this fork will actually be small and will not delay Verkle. If we knew that we would be shipping for 2025, then perhaps teams would have decided in a different way. So I would commit to targeting at least by the end of this year. And the second comment is a quick shout out to the Red team. I think they set out a precedent that I hadn't seen before, perhaps once from the Geth team, which is put out before the meeting, a detailed reasoning for all the EIPs that they want to be included and which ones they don't want to be included and which ones they're open to be discussed. This was late for us. We're planning to reach that internal consensus on Prism and actually have this ready for the next meeting. This would be very good if everyone does the same in the next time. So this is just a quick shout out for them.
Yeah, agreed. It's extremely valuable. And also, yeah, I didn't mention the CL call, but I assume you'll all have a similar discussion next week on your side of things. Yeah, I think this is a good place to end. So yeah, I'll put the PR up for those 3 small EIPs. We can discuss the 3 big ones on the next call. And yeah, talk to you all soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye, everyone.